The art of quiet cruelty. What you need to remember. Last episode, we met Vivian Ashcombe, the perfect Regency wife. Graceful, composed, completely underestimated. We watched her notice the perfume on the coat, the late-night carriages, the hidden letters. We watched her stand in her husband's study, holding a letter that said, "Soon I shall no longer hide in your wife's shadow." And instead of breaking, she became something colder and more deliberate than grief. We watched her invite the mistress into her home with a warm smile. And we watched her burn a financial document in her fireplace, while Agatha Morell settled into the East Wing, believing she had won. She had not won. She had walked into the most elegant trap ever assembled in a Regency drawing room. And now, the game truly begins. The morning after she burned the document, Vivian was at breakfast before anyone else. This was not unusual. She was always first at breakfast, another of her quiet habits that Castro had long since stopped noticing. But this morning carried a different quality. She sat at the table with her tea and her correspondence with the composed alertness of a chess player who has spent the night reviewing the board and arrived in the morning knowing exactly which piece to move first. The household was her instrument. She had been playing it for 6 years without acknowledging that is what she was doing. She had managed its rhythms, its staff, its social calendar, its reputation, all in service of a marriage she now understood had been, on one side, significantly less reciprocal than she had believed. Well, she intended to keep playing the instrument. She simply intended to play a different composition. When Agatha came down to breakfast, later than Vivian, which was itself a small informational note about her habits, her confidence in her position, her assumption that the household's rhythms would wait for her, Vivian was warmth itself. "Miss Morell. Good morning. I hope the East Wing rooms were comfortable." "Very," Agatha said, with the slightly studied ease of a woman who had prepared herself for hostility and was recalibrating for its absence. "Thank you again for the arrangement." "Of course." Vivian passed the toast rack with the automatic hospitality of a woman on her own ground. "I was thinking, since you will be with us for some time, that I might introduce you to a few of my morning routines. The household runs more smoothly when everyone understands its patterns." Agatha looked at her. "That would be helpful," she said carefully. "Wonderful." Vivian smiled. "We can begin with the correspondence schedule. Mrs. Hartley manages the Morning Post, but I review it with her before Lord Ashcombe receives it. Purely organisational. You understand. It prevents unnecessary interruptions to his work." "Of course," Agatha said. She did not understand. That was entirely the point. The system Vivian had managed for years, entirely legitimately, entirely practically, gave her access to the flow of communication through Ashcombe House that was so thoroughly established as her domestic territory that no one, not Castro, not Agatha, not the staff, thought to question it. She was not intercepting correspondence. She was managing it, and as she always had. She simply began managing it with slightly more precision than before. The first manipulation was small, almost nothing really. Agatha had been expecting a note from a dressmaker, a fitting appointment for a new evening gown that Vivian had observed being discussed and had noted with the particular attention of someone who files these things for future use. The note arrived. Vivian reviewed it with Mrs. Hartley, as was her custom. She added 3 words to the delivery instruction before passing it along. "Rescheduled. Thursday instead." Agatha waited for her fitting on Tuesday. The dressmaker was not expecting her. A small confusion, easily resolved, apparently innocent, the kind of administrative error that happens in busy households. But it meant Agatha had presented herself at a Bond Street establishment unnecessarily, looking slightly disorganized, at the precise hour when 3 of London's more socially observant ladies were making their own appointments. One small stone, dropped in very still water. Vivian watched the ripples. The engineering of misunderstanding required the same precision as any technical undertaking, an understanding of materials, of timing, of the exact amount of force required to produce the desired effect without leaving visible marks of the application. She had been watching Castro and Agatha long enough to map the specific vulnerabilities of their particular dynamic. Castro was proud. This was his primary vulnerability, not unusual in men of his position, but unusually acute in Castro specifically. He had built his identity on a foundation of control and social standing, and anything that suggested he was not entirely in command of his circumstances, his reputation, or the women associated with him, produced a specific type of disproportionate reaction. Not rage exactly. He was too sophisticated for crude rage, but a cold, brittle quality that expressed itself as withdrawal and punishment. Agatha was ambitious and acutely sensitive to social hierarchy. She had come from a position that required her to climb, and climbing had made her attuned to slights, real or perceived, with the hypersensitivity of someone who cannot afford to be complacent about her standing. These two vulnerabilities, applied against each other with the right pressure at the right moments, were extraordinarily productive. The first note arrived in Agatha's room on a Wednesday evening. It was written on plain cream paper, the kind available at any stationer, untraceable, in a hand that was not quite anyone's, not quite masculine, not quite feminine. The text was brief. You ought to know that Lord A expressed concern to Lord Whitmore last Thursday that your presence at the Hendley dinner was not, how did he phrase it, quite appropriate for the occasion. He is conscious of appearances. He always has been. No signature. Agatha read it twice, then a third time. She was not stupid. Vivian knew this, had accounted for it, had chosen the content carefully. The note did not make a wild accusation. It made a specific, plausible, socially precise suggestion. Castro caring about appearances was not a surprise. It was simply true, as the specific social venue referenced was real. The doubt it planted was not about Castro's feeling for Agatha, but about something more corrosive, his estimation of her. Whether she was, in his assessment, an asset or a liability. Agatha, whose entire position depended on Castro seeing her as an asset, would not be able to dismiss that question easily. The note to Castro was more indirect. Vivian did not write to him directly. That would have been too obvious, too easily traced. Instead, she had a conversation with Abigail, who had a conversation with Lady Westing at a morning call, who mentioned in passing to her husband that she had observed that Miss Morell at the Hartfield Assembly quite vivaciously engaged with young Mr. Cavendish. Quite the flirtation. Lord Westing, who dined with Castro the following Thursday, I'd mentioned it in passing. The way men mention these things, casually, almost bored, not quite looking at the person they are informing. Castro said nothing, but Vivian, who was managing the seating arrangements for a dinner later that week, observed the quality of his silence when Agatha entered the room, and noted the slight recalibration of his expression. Cavendish, his face said, doing arithmetic it did not enjoy. Another stone, another ripple. The servants were the most delicate instrument. She did not instruct them, never directly, never explicitly. She was too careful for that, and too ethical, in her particular way, to conscript the people below her in the household hierarchy into open deception. But she understood that servants observe everything, and that what they observe shapes what they discuss among themselves, and that what they discuss among themselves has a way of becoming the texture of a household's atmosphere. She created situations, small ones, brief glimpses, a letter on a table where a footman would pass, reading only in its first visible line something that suggested concern about Miss Morell's background. A conversation she had with Mrs. Hartley about the importance of discretion given the sensitivities of having a guest with Miss Morell's particular history. A conversation that said nothing specific, but implied a great deal. The way she asked, with apparently genuine kindness, whether the East Wing staff were finding Miss Morell comfortable to attend to. I know some guests can be demanding. She did not lie. She simply arranged truth in configurations that produced the impressions she needed. The servants began, as servants do, to form opinions. Opinions that expressed themselves in the particular subtext of household service, in the quality of attentiveness, in the microscopic gradations of deference, in the accumulated small signals of a domestic world that had decided, collectively and without explicit vote, where its loyalties resided. They resided, as they had always resided, with the mistress of the house. The Cavendish ballroom in December was exactly the kind of event Vivian usually navigated as a social obligation, present, composed, effective, essentially invisible. She attended because Castro's network required her presence, she managed the necessary conversations, and she returned home, having performed her function without anything so inconvenient as actually enjoying herself. This December was different, and not because of Edmund Vale, or not only because of him, but because Vivian arrived at the Cavendish ballroom having decided, with characteristic precision, that she was finished being invisible. Not conspicuously. She was never conspicuous. But she had put on the deep green silk that she had purchased 8 months ago and never worn because something about it felt, she had told herself, too much, too vivid, too definitively present. She put it on. She did her hair differently. She made 3 small choices that were individually unremarkable and collectively the difference between a woman who is attending a ball and a woman who has arrived at one. She entered the ballroom and she let herself be there. Lord Edmund Vale was 34, recently widowed, and had the air of a man who had experienced enough of life to be interested in things that other men of his position found beneath their notice. He was not conventionally impressive, not Castro's easy handsomeness, not the theatrical authority of the men who commanded rooms through volume and gesture. He was quieter than that, more watchful, with the particular quality of attention that Vivian recognized immediately because she possessed it herself, the quality of someone who was genuinely curious about other people. They were introduced through Lady Barnsworth, who collected interesting people for her social gatherings with the enthusiasm of a naturalist cataloguing specimens. Lord Vale, Lady Ashcombe, I believe you will find each other's company mutually elevating, which is my highest possible compliment to both. Lord Vale bowed. Lady Ashcombe. Lord Vale. She assessed him in the time it took to exchange pleasantries, the way she assessed everything, quickly, thoroughly, filing the result. I was sorry to hear of your loss. Lady Vale was a remarkable woman. Something shifted in his expression. Not grief exactly, but the recognition of someone who had said the true thing rather than the expected thing. She was, thank you. Most people say she was very beautiful, which was also true and considerably less interesting. Beauty and remarkability are not the same thing. No, he said, they are not. He looked at her with the direct attention of a man who had just decided a conversation was worth having. Would you care to dance, Lady Ashcombe? She danced with him, and something happened that she had not planned for and had not included in any of her calculations. She enjoyed it, not as a strategy, though it would become one. She recognized that, even as it was happening. But first, before the strategic value registered, she simply enjoyed the experience of being in conversation with someone who listened, who asked questions that required actual answers, who laughed when she said something wry with the honest appreciation of someone who found it genuinely funny. She had forgotten, she realized, what that felt like. She filed the forgetting away, under a heading she did not yet name. Across the ballroom, Castro watched. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She could feel the quality of his attention, the way you can feel a temperature change. The room did not cool exactly, but something shifted in the atmospheric pressure of it. When she had made her circuit back to the general gathering and exchanged pleasantries with various guests, she was aware of Castro's position at every point. He did not approach her, but she saw him, at one point, say something short and clipped to Agatha, who had been at his elbow with the proprietary nearness she had assumed as her right, and she saw Agatha's expression tighten before she recovered it, and she saw him look at Vivian again, with an expression she recognized, because she had seen it in the early years of their marriage, before familiarity had settled into negligence. He was seeing her. Interesting, she thought, and very useful. Agatha had noticed too. Vivian saw her register it, the moment when Agatha understood that Castro was watching his wife, and that the watching was not the absent, habitual regard of a man monitoring his social asset, but something more alert, more personal. She watched Agatha's face do the arithmetic, and she watched the arithmetic produce, in Agatha's eyes, the first genuine seed of doubt. The Royal Charitable Gathering of December was not technically a royal event, but it was attended by enough people whose proximity to royalty made the distinction academic, and its social register meant that what happened there was discussed across London drawing rooms for at least a fortnight afterward. Vivian had been on the organising committee for 3 years. She had never before considered the organisational role as anything other than a civic obligation. This year, she found it enormously useful. The colour question was perhaps her most elegant small manoeuvre, and Agatha, who was attending as Castro's administrative assistant, a categorisation that society had noted and was beginning to discuss, had planned to wear deep rose for the gathering. This was known to Vivian because Mrs. Hartley had mentioned it in passing, the dressmaker's delivery, the fabric chosen. Deep rose was not, precisely, a forbidden colour for the event, but the patroness of the gathering, the Duchess of Wentworth, a woman of architectural opinions about social proprieties, had expressed, in a committee meeting the previous month, a preference for modest and dignified palettes, befitting the occasion's charitable purpose. She had said this in reference to no one specific. She had said it in the context of general organisational discussion. She had said it in a meeting at which Vivian was present and Agatha was not. Vivian had mentioned the Duchess's preference to every committee member. She had not mentioned it to Agatha. Agatha arrived in deep rose. The Duchess's expression, upon registering this, was brief and glacial, and entirely observed by the 6 women nearest to her, who were also the 6 women most likely to discuss what they observed. The seating arrangement had required only a small adjustment, a repositioning of place cards in the second drawing room that created, almost accidentally, an excellent opportunity for Agatha to be placed between Lord Fenwick, who was partially deaf and conversationally aggressive, and Lady Morrison, who held opinions about women of uncertain social standing that she expressed with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting the social cut. Agatha managed it. She was not without resources, but managing it was visible. The effort was visible, the slight over-brightness of a woman compensating for uncomfortable surroundings. And visible effort at a social gathering of this calibre was its own form of exposure. Then the whispers. Not whispers Vivian generated directly. She was nowhere near them when they began. But she had, in the preceding weeks, shared certain accurate information with Abigail, who had shared accurate information with Lady Beatrice Holloway, who was constitutionally incapable of retaining interesting information without redistributing it. The information was accurate, all of it. Vivian was careful about that. She did not fabricate. She simply ensured that certain truths about Agatha's origins, about the specific nature of her administrative role, about the jewellery that had appeared on her person recently and whose provenance several people were beginning to speculate about, were in circulation. Truth, properly placed, requires no embellishment. By the end of the evening, Agatha had accumulated 3 social reverses, 1 significant snub from the Duchess of Wentworth, and the specific atmosphere of a woman who has begun to sense, without being able to identify the source, that the room is configured against her. She was not yet isolated. But the frost had begun. And frost, Vivian knew from 6 winters of English social observation, had a way of spreading. Vivian sat at her writing desk at 11 o'clock in the evening, in the composed quietness of her private rooms, and wrote. The paper was plain. The hand she used was her constructed one, neither masculine nor feminine, and neither rushed nor deliberate, the hand of no one specific. She had practiced it until it was automatic, until it bore no resemblance to her own writing that she could see, and she had confirmed this by showing a sample to Abigail and asking whose hand it might be. "I have no idea," Abigail had said. "Anyone's. No one's." "Perfect," Vivian had replied. She wrote the note for Agatha's room. "He is searching for your replacement already." She folded it. She sealed it with plain wax. She addressed it in the same constructed hand. She placed it with the morning correspondence that would be distributed the following day through the normal household channels. Another advantage of managing the correspondence system. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up a second sheet and wrote an identical note. The first was for Agatha. The second was for her own records, a documentation of what had been sent, part of the careful accounting she kept of every move in the sequence. She sealed both, filed one, set the other in the distribution. She looked at herself in the mirror above the writing desk. The woman who looked back was composed and clear-eyed and slightly terrifying if you knew what you were looking at. "Sleep well, Miss Morell?" she said quietly. She extinguished the lamp. Character quotes of the episode. Kindness is the most disarming weapon in the social arsenal. People prepare for attacks. They never prepare for warmth. They stand there, receiving your warmth, and they feel victory, and they do not notice you have already removed 3 pieces from the board. Vivian Ashcombe. I had expected her to crack, to show something, jealousy, anger, the undignified desperation of a woman who knows she is losing. She showed me nothing. She smiled and passed the toast and asked whether I had slept well. I have never been more afraid of a person in my life. Agatha Morell. She danced with Vale tonight, and I watched my husband watch her with an expression I have not seen on his face in 2 years. He looked at her the way men look at things they realize too late they are about to lose. I could have told him. That expression is 3 months too late. She is not available to be looked at that way anymore. She is occupied. She is at war. And she is winning. Abigail Whitmore, private letter. Lady Ashcombe is extraordinary. I have met composed women before. Composure is a skill that the well-bred acquire young, but hers is different. Hers is not the stillness of someone managing their feelings. It is the stillness of someone who has finished having feelings about a situation and moved on to having plans about it. Lord Edmund Vale, private journal. Agatha found the note in her room that night. She read it 3 times. She told herself it meant nothing. Someone was trying to unsettle her. It was a trick, an interference, a jealous wife's desperate move. She almost believed it. Almost. Because the thing about a well-placed truth is that it lands differently from a lie. A lie can be argued with. A lie has seams you can find if you look carefully enough. A truth just sits there, quiet, patient, waiting for you to stop arguing with it. Agatha Morell lay in the East Wing room that Vivian had so graciously arranged for her, and she stared at the ceiling. And she could not sleep. That note, those 5 words. He is searching for your replacement already. Vivian didn't lie. She never lies. She simply planted a seed in perfect soil and stepped back. That is not cruelty. That is architecture. Episode 3 is called A House Built on Lies. And the lies are beginning to crack under their own weight. Castro is about to start losing money. Agatha is about to start losing her composure. And Vivian is about to be invited to the one social event that will make her completely, gloriously untouchable. Comment next episode if you need to see what happens next, because the house is about to come down. And Vivian has the most beautiful seat in the room.